we welcome in Bryan Munson of Husker Online, fresh off of vacation. Bryan, you did the smart thing, took the week of 4th of July off. How was your vacation, my friend?
It was good. I think we regret a little bit going from one warm place to another. I think that probably is going to get reviewed a little bit better next time. But all in all, good times were had by all, man. It was Tampa in that area is just it's fun. It's fun to visit. It was wild. It was crazy. There were so many people there. I have never seen that part of the Causeway area so populated and so touristy before. Usually it's a pretty straight shot from like St. Pete all the way up to Clearwater.
You made it back just in time for, potential storm brewing. Are you guys safe and sound? Is that your area? How are you doing with all of that?
You know what? The weather has cooled down, which was very welcome. We did get some overnight rain. I don't know necessarily if that was part of it. We are overcast now. Wind has come up. It's probably about 50 to 100 miles southeast of us, like just the outer bands. We need some precipitation. We don't need the wind though that Houston has got and the 2 million people out of power, down there. So we don't need anything like that. We had a nice little storm the day after Memorial Day. So we're all still cleaning up still here around after that one. But no, it's cooled down here some, and we should get a little bit of rain out of it.
Real quick, my boy. Listen, I've been wanting to go to Dallas. Obviously, we follow each other, and you may have noticed my trip back was horrible. But boy, you guys have been in the hundreds in Texas, like on the regular again. It's looking like that 60-day, 90-day, 100-degree one that we had about 10 years ago.
I am telling you, it was can't remember. It was Father's Day. The water just turned off. We had probably one of the wettest springs I can recall, and I've been down here for 25 years. It's 25 years ago on Friday I moved down here, and I can never recall having that much rain, through the January through April to May even type of months. The lake that we live off of, Lake Ray Hubbard, where that's at Strict, was literally at 100% capacity and actually flooding in some areas. And usually that lake is somewhere between 8 feet to 25 feet down. I mean, you can usually see like the old bridge that goes over the other section of the lake, and it was literally at the brim. I mean, there was nowhere else for the water to go. And literally they've been feeding out of it for weeks now, and it's still at 100% capacity because Lavon is so full. So the Trinity River system down here anyway is just, it's at capacity. I don't know where the water is going to go. I know I'm preaching to the choir because I know that several people up there, with the amount of rain that they got a couple of weeks ago, the Manitowoc area, Omaha, north of that, they're all getting it and seeing it, and the flooding is there, water in the basements. But it's been a really, really weird type of spring. But the temperature, once it shut off, and this too, Strict, when Mother Nature says that's it, the water gets shut off here, the temperature is increased to the hundreds, it runs out for 30 to 40 some odd days, and we don't see the next lick of precipitation until October.
Yeah, that's a fact.
I've already lost a lot of my sod that I put down this spring.
Oh yeah, that's even worse. That's even worse.
It's costing me money watching it.
Man, well, hopefully everything stays sane down there as much as that can happen in your area. It wouldn't be a Nebraska football offseason without a weird departure or some sort of story, Bryan, but I think it lines up perfectly with your Buffalo Bills fandom. Nebraska sees Evan Cooper resign, but it seems like that had been in the works given that Nebraska worked pretty quickly, and we heard conversations with John Butler, hired from the Buffalo Bills within a day. Let's start with the Bills side of things. What were your impressions of John Butler and his defensive backs room in Buffalo?
I mean, he had a tremendous secondary, a lot of great personnel to work with, 2 all-pro safeties, Tre'Davious White to kind of go on top of that. He's developed many other players. I know that he parted with Buffalo in January or February. So I think that this is a tremendous hire. I think number one, I think what you potentially have here, and this is just me just kind of sitting back and taking a look and understanding his Penn State pedigree to, his professional background and what he was able to accomplish in Buffalo, the players that he developed and are linked to. But, if Tony White is really potentially a head coaching candidate, to be hired away from the University of Nebraska, you have the possibility that you hired, Butler as a DC in Wait. That's a very interesting kind of two birds, one stone kind of thing. I think it's really complicated to say that Nebraska improved themselves with the departure of Cooper. I think that that's unfair. I think that everybody would agree that he had an eye for talent. Clearly, the way that he coached his guys fit very well inside of what Tony White tries to do defensively. However, on the surface, at least, it seems to be very promising that Nebraska was able to bring in a guy like Butler, in such a weird part of the year. I mean, it's like Wagger a year ago and what happened with him. You looked and see what Nebraska had to do. They had to replace him internally with basically a staffer, and you didn't have to do that, at least here. Which I think takes a little bit of pressure off the staff and off the team this fall. But you still now also have to kind of, you're starting from scratch. You're starting from scratch in that back end. He's going to be very dependent on Coach White, Coach Dvorak, Coach Rule, all those folks to kind of fill him in. And he's going to be drinking from the water hose for the next month or so before they get to fall camp.
That was going to be my next question for you was, does John Butler become the front runner to run a defense? I completely agree with the conclusions that you've drawn. Do you think John Butler would have taken this job if he didn't have a strong inclination that if Tony White, takes another job to be a head coach somewhere, that it would be him?
I think it depends on what other irons he had in the fire. Like I said, it's a weird time of year. We also went through the Terrence Knighton kind of rumor yesterday, and that's one of the reasons why that rumor didn't make a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
It was he seems to be, at least according to a source that I talked to yesterday, a name that's in demand. I think Terrence Knighton is building a resume. He's getting noticed as far as the play of his players, the development, of course, that he's giving to them. But the timing here is just so odd. It's like, these schools are in the dead period. They have wrapped up their spring practices. They're 3 weeks away from opening fall camp. They've got one more kind of big fiesta recruiting weekend at the end of July, and then they're into basically fall camp. So it's really weird. I don't know if Butler had many other things kind of going. And then again, I don't know necessarily if he would have been open to the stopgap mentality. We need a guy for a season and you're a rental either. I think it needed to have a long-term view to make something, it's a disruptive kind of move, regardless of wherever he's living at now, moving from Buffalo, or if he's originally a Pennsylvania guy and moving over to Nebraska, it's disruptive to uproot and move over. So I think that there had to be some kind of promise there to at least be in that running, if in case next year, or the year after, Coach White gets that opportunity. And I think also there's got to be some other things too about, with him to kind of like keep him interested, keep him motivated. How do we kind of continue to do that with incentives, with bonuses, with changing title, et cetera.
One other thing on this position before we get into some actual recruiting, Evan Cooper was Matt Rule's dude, right? With prospect identification, looking at the track times and these leaderboards and whatnot, sending Rule names, early in the morning, late at night, whatever. How do you think Nebraska's philosophy and process changed with Evan Cooper out the door?
That's such a great question. I mean, that's kind of where my comment for eye for talent, kind of came from. I know that he's the guy that you're going to find breaking down film at 3:00 in the morning. He's the guy that, decides to watch one more guy's, huddle, and turns out he watches 20 more, and all of a sudden it's 4:30 in the morning. And he doesn't even bat an eye about it because he's so dedicated to it. And I think that shows, with what he's done. And I think that's why Matt Rule appreciated him so much. How does it change is really going to be an interesting question. I think what you have to turn is you turn back towards, Sean Padden and Ryan Callahan and Vince Ginta and those guys that are in the recruiting room. They're no slouches. Those guys are no slouches right there. They have a tremendous eye for talent. I think that they believe in their evaluations. I think that so far what we have all seen in short amount of time, it seems like it's a very interesting, kind of way of seeing that talent, and then the way that they have their faith in the staff to develop that talent. It does have this kind of way about being a little bit more thorough and looking at all the things, and it's not just the player that matters, it's the person. And I think people appreciate that. And I think that that's probably one of the things that's still from Rule on down. And I think that, you're going to have to play the game as Coach Rule wants to have it kind of played. And I think everybody's just going to have to pick up, what they lose in Coach Cooper and try to cover up, as much as you can based on that void.
So, Bryan, I have a quick question because Luke McCaffrey has been drafted in the 3rd round, blew everybody away by that being the case. Now, here's the thing about it. We had him as a Husker here. Obviously, He was a quarterback at the time. What do you think was about that relationship there at Rice? I know you're in Texas, so I know you probably have your ear to the ground on something like this. But at Rice, because they obviously gave him a shot there, it just didn't work out. I think in his 2nd year, he goes 4-8. Then they bring in Daniel from Georgia, and he makes a shift. But they had patience with him, and they stayed with him because they knew there was something there. What's your thought on why you think maybe we couldn't make that same assessment, or you think he was just locked and stocked on the quarterback position and just didn't want to make the move? Because I think he could have been a tremendous athlete here for us in a similar manner.
Oh, well, so I think that, I think you have a similar kind of situation playing out right in front of our own eyes with Harvard, where you have this tremendous athlete that has caught, a pass last season. You put him on paper and he compares, to a lot of different guys, and athletically, he might just blow those guys away. I think that there was a real lack of patience and trying to, kind of commit to McCaffrey to be a quarterback long term as opposed to short window. Okay, now you've seen basically the experiment, and the experiment is a one Saturday afternoon kind of a thing. And now we would like to make the full-time move, from here to there. And I think that's kind of what plays into the equation here. I think everything was, there was a lot of pressure, I think, from where things were at under Coach Frost. I think that they realized he was a great athlete, a tremendous athlete. I think that there's two things. I think that, number one, you don't just have great quarterbacks running scout team that can go ahead and, and get the nod on Thursday night, go out there and execute on Saturday. That's a tough situation. Even if they get a week's worth of practice, to kind of prepare themselves, or they were getting some meaningful first team snaps the week leading up to being named the starter on like the Tuesday, it's still difficult, particularly in that conference. And then I think also the kind of short-lived, situation there to get yanked out and say that, you're being demoted again. You got a 1 week kind of thing, and now we're going to kind of come back and sell to you potentially using your athleticism a little bit differently. I think it just seemed like there was not enough patience, maybe not enough of a understanding which way they want to kind of go with him, and just keep kind of try things on Saturdays, as opposed to really selling him, on the full package and what we think that we can kind of do for you and be more like, your brother or your dad, really. I mean, that's really what it came down to.
Yeah. Bryan Munson of Husker Online is our guest. Recruiting, Bryan, David Sanders Jr. announced his Final Four. I'm looking at the graphic right now. There's a lot to break down. Obviously, Nebraska in it, front and center in his graphic, but he's the smallest. Georgia, his arm sleeve is on the right. The other 3 schools, it's on the left. Are you reading into this David Sanders Jr. graphics as much as I am? What do Husker fans need to know about the number 1 offensive tackle in the nation's commitment in about a month?
I was astonished. I mean, I was amazed that I thought I misread it, and I didn't know what was really happening on Twitter when I saw the stuff being retweeted. I mean, he announced his top 6 literally at the On3 elite elite kind of function that was in Chicago, and Nebraska was nowhere to be found. And then for the last several weeks, I guess I should say, it really seemed like Clemson had this one, on lock. So, and now Clemson's not even nowhere to be found on his final list. And Nebraska all of a sudden is. I'm really puzzled. I'm really puzzled by the process. Number one,
is Nebraska puzzled by it?
What's that?
Is Nebraska puzzled by it?
I'm going to say no, and here's why. I've heard great detail about how well that visit went, and when I say that, you have to consider, when he was brought in, it was on Mother's Day weekend. He had nothing else kind of going on, and so they had this opening, and he knew Raiola basically from the visits to Georgia. But then Dylan got stuck, going to TCU to support his sister's graduation in Fort Worth. And so it just kind of just intersected with this other weekend that didn't make it possible for Dylan to be around to kind of host him. But then Nebraska kind of calls in, Caleb Benning to kind of help out. And obviously all hands are on deck, but they had a chance to kind of roll out the red carpet for him. I know the visit went well. I know the family enjoyed it. I know all of those things really happened. I just don't think that it was very effective to have, Raiola be kind of the centerpiece for a reason to give Nebraska a look, and then unfortunately wasn't able to kind of be there for it. And I'm not blaming Raiola here at all. I'm just saying it's just logistically it didn't work out. Maybe there's been a chance for him to sit back and discuss things with his family. Maybe going through a few more visits, maybe they realize NIL isn't a big deal. Maybe it's about the long term here a little bit more. And I'll be very interested to see kind of what happens. I don't think Nebraska has got a great shot here. I really still don't. I mean, you're going from off the radar, missing top 6, now being in the top 4. There's got to be something else that's happened here recently, obviously, to then drop Clemson, who everybody felt like was the front runner, and say, now Nebraska has a real shot going from off the radar to being in the Final Four. I struggle with that, but I do know that the visit for him went incredibly well.
I find that interesting too. Maybe it's, clout chasing with Nebraska fans on social media, but is that also just not kind of the pitfalls of what you do? You get these sagas and you're trying to read the mind of a 17, 18-year-old young man.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, he's a tremendous student. He's incredibly bright. I think he's looking for a complete place. And I think that obviously he maybe had somebody in his ear talking about the SEC, talking about staying closer to home. And maybe that's where, like I said, maybe there was a reconciliation process that he sat back down and to think about things and really compare them all. And during that, he had some enlightenment. And that's maybe what's reintroduced Nebraska to his list. And if that's the case, great. Nebraska, I would say there is no way in heck that Nebraska stopped recruiting him. There's no way that they could. They continued to recruit Brandon Baker all year last year, even into the fall. So I don't think that this is going to be one of those things when Sanders said Nebraska's no longer in the top 6, they were going to stop talking to him. That was never going to happen. But I'd say kudos to Nebraska again for making this cut. I struggle with, the real percentage here of being a good percentage, but Nebraska again is in the running.
Bryan, we've taken a lot of your time, but you mentioned we're 3 weeks away from the start of fall camp. Big recruiting weekend here at the end of July. If people want to check out your work and your coworkers' work, what's the best way to get into Husker Online?
Yeah, get over to Husker Online right now. In fact, I'm going to have a story tonight on a 2026 running back that visited Nebraska recently. I got 3 and Out coming out, and a good little update on Will Hawthorne, who's one of the top remaining targets for Nebraska in the 2025 class. So that'll be up on Wednesday morning. But yeah, that's what's going on right now, and we're still trying to stay on top of how they're going to finish out the month of July in the 2025 class.
There you go. Follow Bryan's advice. Get yourself to Husker Online. He joins us Mondays at 3:30 as well. Bryan, as always, appreciate your time, my man. Have a good rest of your week.
All right, guys. Be good.